Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Israeli. Today, I want to talk about is Israel an apartheid state? And I think you know where I'm going with this video. So let's go straight in and see what are the accusations that people are making. Israel and the apartheid analogy. Israel and the apartheid analogy is a criticism of the Israel government by people whose only mission is to demonize Israel and not look at the facts ever. Even though there are many things to criticize Israel about, but this is going way too far, and we'll see why. Charging that Israel has practiced apartheid against Palestinians, primarily in its occupation in the West Bank, and this is important. Um, because in the West Bank, this is a conflict zone. We still don't know what's going to happen there. It's going to be a country, it's going to be an autonomy, it's going to be part of Israel, it's going to be part of Jordan, who knows? Like, there's a million things that can still happen, and it's a conflict zone. And the people who live in the Palestinian territory, the Palestinians that are not Israeli, they're just that. They're not Israeli. So the laws are different in the West Bank than they are in Israel. And I'm not going to talk about the West Bank because the West Bank today, in many ways, on both sides, it's kind of a Wild West. And there are rules and regulations and different systems in place to make sure that things don't go out of control, but it is kind of a Wild West, and only a peace agreement will bring order to that mess. So I'm not going to talk about the West Bank. I'm going to talk about what people say, because people keep saying that there's an apartheid inside Israel towards Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinians, and that is just plain wrong. Is there racism in Israel? Are there racist people in Israel? Yes, of course, there are racist people in Israel. Are there racist businesses in Israel that might discriminate while hiring people privately? Yes, there is. Is it legal to do that? No, it's not. Yeah, you're not allowed to put up a job advertisement that is directed only at men, or directed only at women, or directed only at Jews, or directed only at Arabs. It's illegal to do that. It has to be open to everybody, just like any democratic country. Okay, so let's go over this article here real fast, because most reports, now there's a new 203-page report by an NGO organization that decided that Israel is an apartheid country. Of course, they decide on the target, and then they shoot the arrow. They already know what they want to say before. But here in this article, Al Jazeera, obviously not pro-Israel, 5 ways Israeli law discriminates against Palestinians. These are the 5 main points that people make when they talk about Israel and apartheid. So I'll go over these 5 points, and I'll add another point at the end that people are also using now. Okay, so we'll go directly into what they're saying. To the main 5 ones that they're blaming Israel for. Right to acquire lease land. A basic law, Israel lands, stipulates ownership of Israel lands controlled by the State Jewish National Fund and the Development Authority can only be transferred between 3 entities, knowing that the JNF leases land it owns to Jews only. 93% of the land in Israel is public and belongs to the state. JNF, or the Development Authority, 13% is controlled by JNF, which has a hugely influential role in Israeli land policies. Palestinian citizens are blocked from leasing about 80% of the land controlled by the state, according to Adalah. Adalah is, again, a group that's anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, but it's worth seeing what they have to say. I'm not automatically against them. When they say Palestinian citizens here, I guess that they mean Israeli Palestinians, and they are blocked from 80%. This is what they say. Now, if we go only by these numbers, it means that 20% is open to them. And being that the Arab population minority is 20% of the population in Israel, it seems proportionate that they're 20% of the population, they'll have access to 20% of the land in their areas. Now, in the Arab villages, the tax collection is a bit problematic, to say the least. So development in those cities is sometimes halted for a while. And a lot of criticism comes to the Israeli government that it doesn't invest enough in the Arab areas, which is true. It's completely true. This is one of my criticisms, that if you want people to start working, paying taxes, and doing everything just like in the Jewish villages, then you have to give them the same kind of opportunities and the same surroundings. You have to make sure that everything functions, that everything works, that the roads are good, that you have traffic laws. In many Arab villages, you go in and the traffic is crazy. There are no laws. People do whatever they want. I have friends that tell me that when they go into the village, they take their seatbelt off, because if they see you with a seatbelt on, you're considered, a pussy. We'll say it like that. So people don't ride with their seatbelts on, and they just do whatever they want inside the villages. It's kind of a Wild West. And then obviously paying taxes and doing your civil duties, it comes in second, third, fourth place. So they need to invest more in those places so they can pay the taxes just like everywhere else, and then they can flourish. But it's not chicken and the egg. The government comes first. The government has to invest in those communities in order to get back from them. That's how it works. You can't wait for the communities to give you and then you give them. You have to give them first. You have to show that you care. You have to make them feel that they're part of the country. Okay, but let's go really fast to see what this JNF is. The Jewish National Fund, founded in 1901 to buy and develop land in Ottoman Palestine, later British Palestine, and subsequently Israel and the Palestinian territories for Jewish settlement. The JNF is a non-profit organization. By 2007, it owned 13% of the total land in Israel. Since its inception, planted trees, dams, reservoirs, done a lot of good things. Now, it is true that they buy land for Jews since the 1901. Now, today, I'm not sure if all this land is only for Jews or if they have to also provide it for any Israeli citizen, because I think it went through the high courts. Maybe it's still there, maybe it's not, I don't know. But I know that the high courts told the country that they have to provide land also to the minorities, more than they have on a bigger scale. I know that they've done that. What came out of it, I don't exactly know at the moment. Okay, now let's look really fast. What's the Palestinian land laws? Okay, in Israel, the land laws, you can't ban anybody from buying just because they're a minority. The Jewish National Fund, I'm not sure how it works over there. They own 13%, and the lands that they bought were aimed to be sold, to be given, whatever, to Jewish citizens. But I think the high courts changed that, and I know that the land that belongs to the country has to be provided in a fair way. And in this article, you see that even now, 20% is available to the Arabs, and they're 20% of the population. So does this need to be improved? Yes, I think it does need to be improved, and I don't think you need to give land at all divided according to that kind of reasoning. But given the state of the country today, and since the cultures are very different and people do want to live separate from each other in the villages, not in the cities. In the cities, it's very mixed, almost all the cities. But in the villages, both the Arabs and the Jews, they want to have their own places with their own culture. Am I for that? I don't know. Me personally, I would not live in either one. I would prefer to live in a city where it's more mixed and everybody lives together happily, like in Haifa, which is the best city in Israel. But, this is the way it works, and both sides like it that way. So, should more be invested in Arab villages? Definitely. Should they be given more opportunities for development? Definitely. All those need to be done, and they will be done. Even under this right-wing government that has been in power for over 12 years, it still was divided fairly fair. And now under this new government and the governments that are going to come in the future, it's probably going to improve because the Arabs are now going to be part of the governments. I said, it doesn't matter if this government works out or not. It's finished. The Arabs are now going to be part of building governments. Okay, so let's look real quick at the Palestinian land laws. Palestinian land laws refer to the ownership of land under Palestinian Authority. These laws prohibit Palestinians from selling Palestinian-owned lands to any man or judicial corporation of Israeli citizenship living in Israel or acting on its behalf. These land laws were originally enacted during the Jordanian rule in the West Bank. Land sales of Israelis is considered treason by the Palestinians because they threaten the founding of a future state and to halt the spread of moral, political, and security corruption. Palestinians who sell land to Israelis can be sentenced to death. Although death sentences are seldom carried out, the death sentence has to be approved by the Palestinian Authority president. Yeah, sentenced to death. Now, it threatens the future state, which means if there will be too much land owned by Jews, it can threaten the future state of Palestine. I agree with that. But why is it not true for the other side? Why is it true for the Palestinians and nobody says anything? It's great. They can decide that if you sell land to an Israeli or a Jew, you can be executed, and nobody talks about it. There are no reports, 200-page reports about it. But if Israel decides to divide it fairly, not prohibit, you're not allowed to prohibit sale to an Arab. And actually, even if an Arab is able to prove that you didn't want to rent your apartment to him because he's an Arab, you'll be in trouble. Yeah? It's illegal to do that. In the Palestinian Authority, it's not just that it's not illegal, it's illegal to sell any land to Jews. You can get a death penalty. And nobody talks about that. Double standard, talking about double standard. Okay, so this is the first law that actually does have some kind of, not prejudice, but it works more towards the Jews, we'll say it that way. But it's not prejudice because the Arabs do have access to it. Not like they're trying to say, and here they even say it, yeah? Let's go to the other ones. Right of return. According to absentee property laws, Palestinian refugees expelled after November 29, 1947 are absentees and are denied any rights. Their land, house, apartments, and bank accounts, movable and immovable properties were confiscated by the state. Simultaneously, the law of return gave Jews from anywhere in the world the right to automatically become Israeli citizens. Now, this law of return exists not only in Israel, it exists in many countries. And for what I remember, Mexico has one, Germany has one, I think Spain has one, I think France has one. Many countries have it. And it's totally legal. This law is totally fine. Now, the absentee, the people who were evicted, left by themselves, or left because they were scared from the villages in the war in 1948, the same number of Palestinians that were, we'll call it evicted for now, even though many of them left on their own without being evicted, and the whole story of the Arab armies telling them to leave because there's going to be an attack, and then they can come back. Everything together, about 700,000 people were evicted, we'll say, okay? But the same number of Jews were evicted from Arab countries. Yeah, about the same number of Jews were evicted to Arab countries, only they came to Israel and they got Israeli citizenship and they continued living their lives, and the Palestinians stayed refugees forever, starting this refugee economy, this refugee politics. Yeah? So this is totally legal, there's nothing wrong about that, and they can keep trying to pound it. And this is very important for the anti-Israel people, because if they do get the right of return for Palestinian, Israel is finished. Then you have two-state solution. One state Palestine and the other state Palestine. There will be the two-state solution, because there will be a majority of Arabs, Palestinians in Israel itself, and it'll stop being Israel. That's why this is important to them. But it's also important to us in Israel, because we want to keep Israel more or less the way it is, improve it, but keep it Jewish. That's what we want, yeah? And that's the truth. When Israel was in the diaspora, the Jews, life was rough. We were always under the boot of a different nation and different nations. Some were nicer, some were less nice. At the end, there was Holocaust, there were pogroms everywhere. Some kings liked the Jews, some kings didn't like the Jews. It was always at the mercy of other nations. And we're not going to have that anymore. Now we have our own country, our own nation that is strong and can protect itself. And that's why Jews can feel free everywhere in the world. They don't need to be afraid anymore. They can be confident, free, and live a full life. And this right of return, if Palestinians will somehow get it, which they never will destroy this. And we're not going to let it. Okay, let's continue. Right to residency, and the next ones go together. Right to family life. So these two go together. So the right to live in Israel, to get residency, Um, Again, this is the thing for West East Jerusalem and the West Bank. It doesn't have to do with Israel. Once you have an Israeli citizenship, you're an Israeli citizen. And right to family life. This was a big story because Israel used to allow people to reunite their families. So if there was one Palestinian Israeli that had Israeli citizenship and he had a wife and kids that were Palestinians or Egyptian or whatever, he could bring them and his family and grandmother and the whole thing and live in Israel. But it got out of hand. They used it to disrupt the demographics, and they used it in a political way, and Israel stopped it. They said, no, if you want to live with your family, you can live with them over there. It's okay, you know? And it is a bit of a mess, but this is something that's much more complicated and much more difficult to talk about, and it doesn't affect everybody. Some people have the right to reunite, and some people have to go, and you can live your life on the other side with your family. Not a problem there. Okay, now this one is an important one. Right to commemorate Nakba. Now this is a lie, because Palestinians traditionally mark Israel's official Independence Day as Nakba Day, a day of mourning and commemoration, marking the expulsion of more than 700,000 Palestinians in 1948 to make way for creation of the State of Israel. The Nagpur Law in 2011 allows the finance minister to reduce funding or support to an institution if it holds an activity that commemorates Israel Independence Day as the day of mourning. The law causes major harm to the principal equality and rights of Arab Israelis to preserve their historical history and culture. The law deprives Arab citizens of the right to commemorate the Nakba, an eternal part of their history. Now, any Arab that wants to commemorate the Nakba on Facebook, Instagram, put a sign on their window, wear a shirt, have a protest, they can do that. On the individual, private side, you can commemorate whatever you want. Yeah, in the universities, when I went to university in Haifa, they had Nakba Day, yeah. But institution, which is financed by the country, cannot have a day that says, your Independence Day is my disaster day. It's an institution. It belongs to the country. It's Independence Day. It's a happy day for the country. Maybe not for you, but for the country it is. And an institution, a public institution that gets money from the taxpayer, cannot commemorate the country as an evil thing. That does not make sense. Yeah? As a private person, you can say whatever you want. And I'm not even going into the whole story of a war started. The Arabs lost. There was an expulsion, both of Arabs and of Jews. Yeah? And I'm sure it was horrible for the Palestinians. I'm sure it's still horrible for them today. I know they still remember it today. Grandmothers still remember that time as an awful time, I'm sure. But all wars are like that. This is not something special for the Palestinians. All wars are like that. And Israel exists now. Yeah, and it's an Independence Day for Israel. It's a happy day. And if you want to mourn that day, that's your business. Nobody will tell you not to. But a public institution, like, that makes no sense. Which country in the world, on their Independence Day, also mourns? No country does that. So you cannot expect a country to allow its public institutions to mourn on its Independence Day. It makes absolutely no sense. Okay, so these are the 5 things they bring. And as you can see, none of them come even close to anything that we can call apartheid. But there's a new law that was passed in 2018, which is called Israel as the Nation State of the Jewish People, the Nation Law, informally known as the Nation State Bill, or the Nationality Bill. So this bill came. I do not support this bill. Is it an apartheid bill? No, far from it. This is, for me, a bill for people that lack confidence in their country, that try to get some political incentives, political benefits out of this, because people, the right in the last few years Their way to rule is by fear and hate. They install fear, and out of fear they get hate, and that people vote for them because they are there to protect them. So this comes out of lack of confidence and politicians cynically using people's fears that they installed in them. But is it an apartheid law? No, not even close. And let's go over it and see what it says. Okay, this is the legislation, not important. Okay, contents of the law, basic law. The land of Israel, historically homeland of the Jewish people, in which the state of Israel was established. Yeah, we know that. We have that also in the Declaration of Independence, which is very similar to the American one. But here they decide to add a few more things. So this is in the Declaration of Independence also. Everything is fine. The state of Israel is a national home of the Jewish people, in which it fulfills its natural, cultural, religious, and historical right to self-determination. The right to exercise national self-determination, state of Israel, unique to Jewish people. Fine. The name of Israel. Now, this is the names because people are talking about changing not necessarily the name, of course not necessarily the flag, but the anthem. Changing a few words here, changing a few words there, and people were talking about it because it does have the word Jewish heart in it and like Jewish dream in it and all that. And many people say if you change it, just take the Jewish out and make it more like Israeli so the Arabs can also feel connected to it. And there is something to it. 20% of the population are not Jewish, and they deserve to feel connected to the anthem as well. But on the other hand, it is a Jewish state and with Jewish identity that came out of a lot of Jewish suffering, and there are a lot of Arab states that have in their anthem the Arab narrative or the Arab beliefs, and I think it's okay if Israel has its own state anthem that has the word Jewish in it. I think that the Arabs can deal with that. Capital of the state, Jerusalem. Here, this is something that they wanted to have in a basic law that you cannot change under a normal majority. You need a special majority to change a basic law. So here they have Jerusalem, but there's already a basic law, Jerusalem. We already have that. So this is just, this is political. This has nothing to do with real life. It doesn't affect real life. It's just political to get more votes, to make the right voters feel more patriotic or whatever. Language, so Hebrew, and here they changed something which I think is awful. The Arabic language has a special status in the state regarding regulating the use of Arabic in state institutions or by them will be set by law. It means Israel has two formal languages, Hebrew and Arabic. And now they change it so Arabic will be a language with a special status. It doesn't change anything in real life. Again, it's this lack of confidence. And the reason I think this is horrible is because Israel, whether we like it or not, is in the Middle East. And people around us speak Arabic. And I think not only that this law is bad, they need to take it one step further. They need to start making a law that you have to teach Arabic in school. Yeah? That people have to know at least basic Arabic in Israel. Arabic needs to be a formal language and also taught as a formal language. So everybody will speak both languages. But, I don't agree with it, but is it apartheid? No. And this clause does not harm the status given to the Arabic language before this law came into effect. So why do you even have it? I don't understand. In gathering of the exiles, a Jewish immigration, and this is a connection to the Jewish people. So again, this all the diaspora, it will the Jewish that are outside, the Jewish people that are outside Israel, we also have connection with them. We keep relations with them. It's very important because, like I said, Israel today existing gives Jewish people confidence to live all over the world without needing to fear. Yeah, and if the people in their country start going crazy against Jews again for any reason whatsoever, they can just say, fine, we're going to Israel. Yeah, and be safe. Jewish settlements, so this is a controversial one. The state views the development of Jewish settlements as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. So of course this talks about the West Bank mostly for the right-wingers. But so far, as you can see, the annexation is not happening. It's not going to happen. It didn't happen under Trump. It's not going to happen under Biden. So this is, again, just lip service for the right wing. That's all it is. Official calendar, the Hebrew calendar, next to the Gregorian calendar. Very confusing, but fine. It was like that before. Independence Day, Memorial Day, and Holocaust and Heroism Day are official official holidays. Day of rest is the Sabbath. Non-Jews have the right to maintain days and rest of their Sabbath and festivities. Details of this will be determined by law. They can do whatever they want on their days. And the immutability, the basic law shall not be amended unless by another basic law passes by a majority of Knesset members. So it is possible that maybe not this government, but maybe the next government, that this law will be cancelled altogether, not because it's a racist or apartheid law, it's because it's unnecessary. Israel has a declaration of independence. Israel doesn't need this law, but this law was done as a lip service for the right, and it worked. Let's see 1 second. So I can just show you what the declaration says. Okay. Formal declaration of establishment of Israel was proclaimed on May. Let's see, to be known state of Israel, determination of mandate. I just want to show you the, well, it doesn't, I don't see it here, and I don't want to look for it for too long, but this Declaration of Independence gives rights to everybody, regardless of their race, gender, color, all those things, sexual orientation. It makes the state a Jewish state, but equal for all its citizens. That's what the Declaration of Independence wanted to say, and it has many of the points that this law has, but without the lip service, without the political ticket, without the political agenda behind it. Okay, so guys, this is all I have for now. So is Israel an apartheid state? No, not under any kind of criteria that can be regarded as apartheid. And not only that, when you use the apartheid narrative, you not only hurt the peace process, because this kind of narratives makes Israelis very defensive, and rightfully so. You're blaming them on a horrible crime, which is a lie. And the second thing is that you're hurting the real victims of apartheid. You're hurting the real victims that suffered apartheid in the past and that are suffering apartheid now in many, many countries that nobody's talking about, because there is no anti-those countries agenda, but there is an anti-Israel agenda. And if you'll see my video about the UN being biased against Israel, it's very plain to see. It's extremely plain to see. So when you do that, you're hurting the people who actually suffered apartheid and are suffering real apartheid at the moment, and real genocide, by the way, also at the moment, which Israel is not guilty of neither one, and easily proven, by the way, very easily proven on both of them. Does it mean that Israel doesn't need to improve? It needs to improve in a million things, especially how it's dealing with the Arab neighbors, its Arab citizens, and a lot of that type of stuff, and how it's dealing with the different type of Jewish partitions that are inside the country. It's all crazy, but somehow this juggle kind of works, and it does get better, and it does improve, and this type of stuff doesn't help at all. So is Israel an apartheid state? You decide for yourself, yeah, but if you're honest, then no, it's not. Does it mean that there's no criticism to make against Israel? Of course, there's a lot of criticism to make. There's legitimate, fair criticism that can be done, that can actually improve things, and things that Israel can actually do, yeah? And once you approach it the right way. But the way right now things are working, blaming Israel at everything under the sun, at the United Nations and different reports and Hague and all that bullshit, it doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. And if people are actually want to have peace, the narrative, the dialogue has to change, not just in Israel, but everywhere in the world, including social media. All the people on social media that are talking about this, most of you don't know shit. Let's be honest. Most of you are very biased because you're either Muslim or you're just anti-Israel because of your community in different places in the world, but you don't know shit. And when you take one side, also the ones that fight very passionately for Israel and don't see the Palestinian side at all, you guys don't know shit either, yeah? And when you do that, and you're not for peace. So just be honest about it. Just say that this conflict is what keeps you going, and you want this conflict to keep going. So you're going to throw oil into the fire, and just admit it, and it's fine. Yeah, people will respect your honesty. But if you're for peace, if you're honestly for peace, then you have to change the dialogue. Yeah, and this kind of narrative will never work. But I'm again for freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of everything, and I'm not for banning or canceling anybody. Even though, just so you guys know, this cancel culture that pisses off a lot of people now, celebrities and different things that things get canceled like in a whim. It all started with Israel. This cancel culture started with Israel, trying to cancel Israel all the time, but they failed because Israel brings a lot of beautiful, helpful, positive things to the world that the world cannot ignore. Yeah. Okay, guys, this is my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it was a little bit long, but there was a lot to talk about. So for all of you who stayed until the end, thank you so much. If you want me, if there's anything that I've missed, or you have any comment, anything that I've missed also, that a point that proves that Israel is an apartheid state or something like that, just put it in the comments and I'll talk about it in one of the videos, I promise. And other than that, if you like it, please comment, like, subscribe, and share. It's very important. And I'll see you on the next video. So have a great, great day. Bye.